Welcome to the Cabrera Lab Podcast.
Hey,
Hey,
how are you?
kicking butt.
You don't decide ahead of time which thing you're going to answer
I
to.
just say whatever
Kicking
comes
butt.
out.
So I was thinking about something.
Uh-oh.
Okay, so the other day, I
Yeah.
asked you if you wanted coffee. I was going to get one for myself.
Yeah.
And in our house, we have many different types of possible coffee because we're coffee fiends, right? We have coffee we brew in a pot. We have an espresso machine. We have milk frother.
Yeah.
I mean, you're Colombian. We have lots of coffee.
A lot of coffee.
We like our coffee.
Yeah.
So there are many choices. And you said, I'll have a depth charge. I said, what the hell is a depth charge? And then I thought to myself, I said, oh, you mean a red eye?
Yes.
Because in coffee world, a red eye is a cup of brewed coffee, and then you pour a shot of espresso in it.
Yeah.
It's called a red eye.
A red eye, just for our viewers here, in case it's not obvious, this is a shot of espresso, and this is, let's say, a large coffee.
Yeah.
And a red eye is when you take the shot of espresso and you put it in the coffee.
Yes.
A depth charge is more of an alcoholic thing. So it's you take a shot of alcohol and you take a beer and you put the shot of beer of the shot of alcohol into the beer and then drink it.
Which led to an interesting conversation.
Yes.
You pointed out that structurally, these two things are the same. You're taking a stronger version of a beverage and you're putting in a weaker version of the beverage, right?
Yeah,
Stronger coffee,
basically.
weaker coffee,
Yep.
stronger
Same
alcohol.
basic structure. What's interesting about this is red eye is not depth charge, espresso is not alcohol, coffee is not beer, right? So the information variable of these two things is completely different.
Yep.
So the information variable between this does not equal the information variables between of this.
Right.
But the organization of the way this is organized or structured
Yeah.
is exactly the same as the way this is organized or structured, with the possible difference that one structure, the glass, in this one the glass goes in, and then this one the glass doesn't go in, just the espresso. But that's the only subtle difference.
Yeah.
So even that we can differentiate the structures that are almost exactly the same and the structures that are just slightly different.
Right.
But so in most cases this is completely different, and yet underneath is the same structure. And this brings into the idea of M equals IO, which is the idea that our mental models, or the meaning that we make, is a combination of the information and the way that the information is organized. And the O is equal to DSRP. So the way we organize things is DSRP structure.
Right.
Or DSRP organization. And the way we organize things is how we get meaning, and it's also the way that reality organizes information, right? Or reality organizes information. You can take different atoms and organize them differently and get different molecules, or the same atoms and organize them differently and get different things.
Right.
So,
But this is an example that leads to many interesting things. So first of all, it illustrates the underlying structure and the information, meaning it helps you understand the difference between the I and the O.
yeah.
The other thing it does is it highlights a key problem around distinction making, which is I say something, you say something, depth charge, and your mental model is this thing.
Yeah.
And I say this, and my mental model is this thing. So we're missing each other in the words.
Yes.
The distinctions.
Oftentimes the information is what's getting us confused with each other.
But that happens all the time.
All the time. There's a famous, in linguistics, there's a somewhat famous saying, which is woman without her man is helpless. So that's saying that women, if you take away the men,
I get what
are
you're
helpless.
saying.
Yeah. And then you can also write that saying, which is women without her man is helpless. Well, that has the exact opposite meaning.
Yeah.
But if you notice, literally down to the commas, this has the exact same information. So this information is exactly equal to this information.
Right.
But now in this case, the structure is slightly different. The organization is not quite the same. Because we just shifted we made this thing an object, a distinction. Without her, man, without her, it becomes a kind of a distinction of the system of parts.
Right.
This becomes completely different.
Yes.
So it's the same basic idea. And I think M equals IO, for me, M equals IO is like really clarifies so much about what's going on in the world, what's going on in teams, why we miscommunicate with each other, why we get in arguments, why we get in conflicts, why we don't understand things, why student and teacher aren't on the same page, where this teacher doesn't understand what the student is understanding or not understanding and can't help them. I mean, M equals IO is like underlying all that.
I mean, you gave all the examples of where there's confusion, like just basic disagreements. But one of the things that I know, and it's become a habit in our house, is before we start disagreeing and arguing, I say, wait, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Like, what's your mental model of that?
Yes.
And then we have that moment of clarity, because oftentimes arguments are just so far down the road from a distinction error. Right? I said something and you said something and we thought we meant the same thing, or actually, there was just discontinuity across our mental models. And I think that one of the things that's really helpful is to do that check and just say, oh, I said red eye, you said depth charge. What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
And then we get to the right one, which was mine, by the way, which was red eye. I'm just kidding.
Like I was saying, this happens on teams.
Yeah.
And to huge cost, right? If a team gets together and they go, okay, what's the project we're working on? Blah blah blah. Okay, great. An hour later, they're off to the races, and they spend 6 months, not realizing that original meeting, they weren't actually on the same page.
Yep.
Right? They might have said the same things.
Yeah, same words.
But they meant totally different things by it, right? And look at how easy it is to say the same thing and mean totally different things.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and now we've got a whole team of people working for 6 months.
It's a lot of money.
A lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of resources, a lot of things. And they actually weren't working on the same thing. They had different mental models of the original project or initiative or whatever. And then the same thing in a marriage or a relationship. Mm-hmm. You could have a lot of conflict over a misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Well, a misunderstanding is an M equals IO problem.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that we understand the I variables and the O variables.
Yeah.
And if we understand those, what's the I and what's the O, and is the I being organized by the same O, or is the I different, or is the O different?
Yeah.
Unless all those things are the same, then we're not dealing with the same mental model, the same meaning.
Yeah.
And this is really important. What is meaning? Well, meaning is the thing, mental model or meaning is the thing that's going to drive all of our behavior, all of our action. Because if we believe that something is a certain way, then we're going to act as if it's that way.
Yes.
Which means that out of meaning comes all of our action, all of our behavior, all of our emotion, all of our efforts will come out of meaning. If we make a certain meaning, then everything we do after that will be derivative of that.
Yes.
And that's powerful. That means that for those 6 months, if I have model A and you have model B, and we think that we have the same model, you'll be operating for 6 months. Every action that you take will be along bringing about a model B.
Yeah.
And every action I take will be bringing about model A. And slowly we will diverge in the vision of the project, or the vision of the marriage, or the vision of the relationship, or the vision of the whatever.
Yeah. But then there's a moment where we're like, wait, why are we not in the same space? Like, why didn't we end up in the same place? Because we diverged in our meaning. We went different ways, and then we're supposed to end up at the same spot.
And at that moment, if you don't understand M equals IO, you'll probably mess that one up too.
Yes, but put that in the positive. If you do understand MIO, then you won't mess it up.
Yeah, exactly.
See?
And if you do understand MIO, you wouldn't have messed it up at that first moment, at that origin
and you
point.
save yourself a lot of time.
You save yourself a lot of time and hassle and energy and wasted resources.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's powerful.
The other thing that is interesting to me, I was thinking about this also, is I would challenge people to see these sort of silly examples and say, what is the meaning of that? And to see little bits of systems thinking, DSRP exercises in their daily life. I mean, we didn't intend for this to become anything.
No.
It literally was a real thing. And we're, and then you were saying, well, look at the structure versus the information. Well, people can do that with their own.
The other thing along those lines that's really important, again, the O is DSRP, distinction, systems, relationships, and perspectives. So imagine that you have a red eye and you're like, oh, that's a really interesting drink, and I like that drink. And then let's say you're a bartender and you're like, there's this thing that people do with coffee. I wonder if I could do that with, alcohol.
Yeah.
Well, what's the basic pattern? It doesn't mean that it has to be a coffee drink, right? So you're not misled by the information. What's the underlying structure of that thing?
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's this, and I'm going to call it depth charge. So that person, that first bartender, or that first mixologist or whatever, is an innovator. They innovate. Mm-hmm. Now, we have these two patterns, and we go, wait a minute, right? So you say, well, maybe that's not the way it happened. Maybe he, saw his dog and came up with it or something, or was a submariner in the Navy and came up with it, or whatever. But now we have these two examples, similar structure. Okay, well, let's take it in another direction, which I'm just making this up now. Let's take this with juice. Well, what would be the, big version of juice?
Big version?
Yeah.
Like a weak juice? Like
juice.
Or like you could pick a flavor.
Yeah, like let's say apple juice, right?
You could depth charge some cranberry in there.
Yeah, you could depth charge like an extract.
Yeah.
Or a like a thick, I don't even know what you call
syrup.
it, but like a syrup or even like a more concentrated version of it, right? And whatever that is called, X. Well, you can think about that, right? Mm-hmm. So you start to innovate in a totally different realm, and I just picked the realm. So you could do another one over here, and you could pick some other realm and say what happens fundamentally. It doesn't even have to be about liquids. It could be what happens when you put a strong thing into a weaker thing, right? You're seeing the pattern.
Yeah.
Right? So you can put a strong food inside of a weaker food. Skincare. What would that look like?
In skincare, they actually do this a little bit where you have like a base level cream, and then you put an oil or a collagen or a peptide. Right.
So you have your base cream container, and then you
add like an anti-aging thing or something that makes your skin glow. So there's all choices here, actually.
And these are much more kind of like
they're like little tiny jars, concentrate, or they're oils.
Yeah, oil.
And you add them to your
collagen
cream.
Or some other
peptides. Yeah.
Right. So that or that. Right. Yep. The point is, you can take these things and apply them. This is actually this M equals IO is actually with DSRP in the O is like an algorithm for innovation, because you can innovate at the I level, but you can also innovate at the structural or organizational level, and you can see things in one domain that can be applied to another domain.
So you take the structure, and you can use that to innovate new instantiations of that structure. Yeah,
if you can see the O, you can utilize it with or without the I, meaning most people don't separate the I from the O. This is just the red eye. That's what it is. That's what it's always going to be. They don't separate the I from the O.
And they don't see the structural similarity.
And they don't see the structural similarity unless you point it out. What I'm saying is, and then this is pattern recognition. This is, this is the base of so many different cognitive things that drive creativity, innovation, empathy, understanding, all kinds of things, right? Mm-hmm. And if you don't see the O, you don't see any of that. You take things like as they come informationally.
I think this also applies to interesting things like conversations. Totally. So I sometimes have conversations with people, and it feels like the same conversation, even though it's about something different, because there's a pattern of the structure of how a person communicates.
Completely.
Right?
Yeah, so that's a great example. Like, let's say you're in a conflict in your relationships.
Yeah.
And like the first time it's about the baseball game, and the second time it's about dinner, and the third time it's about plants.
These are not real examples, by the way.
No, I'm just making it up.
I don't have conflicting about any of those.
No, I'm saying in a hypothetical relationship
baseball,
where you're having conflict, we had an argument about, the baseball game, something about it. And then we had an argument about, what did I say?
Plants.
And then we had an argument about coffee or something.
Yeah.
And
it could be anything.
Coffee is not plants, is not baseball. So you don't see the pattern. But if you can see the pattern, you go, oh, the pattern of our conflict is X and Y lead to P, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
And you see the underlying structure of that at the baseball game. Oh, and then we see it again in the coffee shop. And then we see it again over the plants.
Yeah.
The watering of the plants or whatever it is. And then you go, wait a minute, these aren't three separate arguments. This is one pattern.
This episode is sponsored by Training Camp, the ultimate online spot for building the mental fitness that drives personal and professional change and success. At Training Camp, you'll have access to the science and practice of thinking with personalized thinking assessments, tiered training, and best of all, practice that improves skill. Go to cabreralab.org to learn more. And now, back to the episode.
Now, if I can solve that one pattern, I can solve potentially an infinite lifetime of conflicts.
Yeah.
All the conflicts that go by that pattern. And you can do this with yourself as well in your own mental health and things like that, your own issues that you have. You'll see patterns that underlie it.
Yeah.
So if you don't see the structure, you're not going to see the pattern. Unless the pattern's exactly the same, like
right.
the information and the organization is the same. But oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes it's like a different situation, different time, different context, everything seems different. So we don't see the similarity.
I mean, I think a good example of that is, if you have had teenagers, there are moments where you can talk to them over the course of a day about 3 or 4 different things, and their reaction is reactive, or they take things personally.
Yeah.
And if you take a moment to say, oh, there's a pattern of reactivity here across these conversations, and then you go to your kid and you say, what's going on? Like, how you feeling today? You dealing with something? Because something is creating that pattern for them that they're maybe not seeing.
They won't see it.
But because you see the pattern, you can say, oh, there's something here, there's something more to this, because you wouldn't usually be so reactive about taking out the trash or feeding the dog
and there's patterns in information and there's patterns in structure or organization, and this multiplies what you're able to do
because you see it,
because you see the difference between information and organization. It's a very simple thing to see that every one of these things of meaning that we make is essentially made up of information and the way the information is organized. It's very simple.
Yeah.
And that there are rules to the way information is organized, and that's distinctions, systems, relationships, and perspectives. But once you see that, you can't unsee it. And you'll start to see it everywhere, and you'll start to see that you can do amazing things with it. You can innovate. You can recognize. You can become more aware. You can just see more. M equals IO is just pervasive.
It is, but you also said just now DSRP is the rules of organization, and I think that's true. But I also think it extends to it's the language of organization. So if you want to be able to see and then also talk structure with people, I can say, well, wait, what do you mean by that? Or, oh, are you making a relationship between A and B? Because I'm making a relationship between A and D. So there's a language for uncovering a person's mental model in conversation by using, because they're distinguishing things, they're organizing things, they're connecting things, and you obviously know they have a perspective because they're,
in this particular example, you in the depth charge red eye example, just to bring that home, you've got this relatively strong elixir kind of distinction. You've got this relatively weaker and larger, other thing. Right. I'm trying to not use
it's related
too many
but
words.
Weaker.
And then you've got this relationship between them, which is the same. And then overall, you have this system that these two things make up.
That creates this.
With the relationship. And, really, the only thing that's changing I don't have another color, but the only thing that's really changing is kind of the environment that it's done in. This is kind of alcohol bars, thing, and this is kind of coffee shop and coffee, right? And so we see that differently. We get slightly different things, right? Yeah. So that's perspective.
Yep.
And we get different names and things like that. Red eye, obviously the name has to do with
keeping you awake.
Depth charge obviously has to do with like this,
getting serious about your alcohol,
drunk or something like that. So yeah, it's very powerful.
Yeah.
Even with simple examples like this.
Yeah, I like that. And so you can have DSRP helps you see the structure, and then the nice thing that you pointed out is once you see that structure, you can extend it to other things, right?
Yeah, this structure or any structure. Once you see the structure, you start to see. It's like seeing something in 3D that used to be 2D. And when I say something, I mean all of life, right?
Yeah.
So it's like not a small deal. Like you'll realize when you understand M=IO and DSRP that you've been seeing life, reality, in 2 dimensions for a long time, and suddenly things start looking like dimensional.
Yeah.
And colorful. It's like you're looking in gray, 2-dimensional, and then all of a sudden it becomes colorful and 3-dimensional.
Yeah.
It's quite powerful.
It is. I also would really emphasize start to see it in small stuff.
Small, yeah, like
in
silly
everyday
stuff
life,
like
even a silly thing like what kind of coffee do you want?
Yeah, exactly.
And the 2 competing mental models.
Yeah.
Based on the 2 different names. I mean, see it everywhere.
Remember that thing we saw the other day?
Oh, the bottle redemption.
Yeah.
You're talking about the beverage container redemption center at Wegmans.
Was that what it was? The beverage
container redemption distribution center.
Distribution center.
It was a really long.
There's a long set of distinctions for what we used to call recycling.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
Or bottle return or whatever.
Yeah.
But somebody thought that it needed like all this kind of detail to make it. And it was this huge sign with these big words on it. Mm-hmm. Everywhere you go, notice the distinctions that people are making. Notice the way things are grouping and the way different things group differently. Like different people will group the same things differently, right?
Yeah.
That's the S. Notice the way things are related or the implication of relationship, especially like Coke is life or McDonald's is happy. Notice the way things are being related and implied relationships, and also how they're not being related.
Yes.
And that's the R. And then notice which perspective people are coming from when they're saying all these things or doing all these things.
Yeah.
And is there a different perspective that we can come from when we're saying or doing all those things? That's such an easy thing to do every single day in every single moment. And it's like, again, it just turns this flat, unidimensional kind of like colorless landscape into this like robust, cool, wacky place that life is. And you just see so much more, and it's cool.
It is cool.
So
we should make a pair of glasses that's I and O, like you're seeing it. And to train people to see both.
Yeah.
And then
that would be cool, wouldn't it? If like you had a pair of glasses that would be like, here's the eye and there's the...
Well, they have those funny glasses now that you can, talk to and...
Well, I think that covers... I don't even remember what we started with. What did we start with? How did we get on this?
I always find it interesting when there are really notable stories of when we see...
Oh, we started with this.
I and O in real life.
Yeah.
In a moment that you would be otherwise unsuspecting of. And I'm saying to people who are watching, start to pay attention to these little things because all of this is underneath it.
And they can teach you a lot, like little silly things that, they all have the same structure.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, just see it everywhere.
It was funny, I was at a meeting the other day. This person who, doesn't really believe in, what they're doing, but there was like a graphic, and there were all these things going in the graphic.
Yep.
And, it was basically a Venn diagram, and then the whole thing would shift depending on which thing out here we were looking at it from.
Yes,
right?
That was a great graphic.
This is a person that doesn't really see DSRP And yet this thing basically was just doing DSRP, right? It's showing the relationships, right? Venn diagrams are just relationships. Like this area is the relationship between this and this. It's the area of shared parts.
Yep.
This is the area of not shared parts of the whole.
Yep.
Right? So this is a whole, this is a, part whole, which is S, and this is a whole, and this is a whole, and then there's all these shared relationships, parts.
Yep.
And then there's all these distinctions sitting, all the parts are distinct and the wholes are distinct. So there's just all these distinct things, and all of it sort of changes when you change the perspectives.
That was
right?
one of the best graphics I'd seen in reading.
Yeah.
And that's just
there it is.
DSRP.
It's just DSRP. It's happening all over the place.
It was so clear.
It was so clear, and there was a reason why it was clear, because it was really well done DSRP.
Yeah.
And it took a long time to create this, and a lot of people that are working really, really hard to create really, really clear, concise, well thought out things don't know that they're doing it. They don't know that they're doing DSRP. And if you know you're doing, like you said, if you know you're doing it, you're aware of it, and you have the language for it, then all of a sudden this becomes very easy to do.
Yes.
Because it's not an evolutionary it's not like a random evolutionary walk until you discover something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like,
it's purposeful.
It's purposeful, and you discover the things you want to discover in the way you want to discover it because you have a purpose and you have a map.
I think seeing it everywhere, from the simplest things like what kind of coffee you want to the more complicated. I mean, this was presenting probably a year's worth of work around some curriculum ideas in one graphic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's useful for all of them. So I would say look for it everywhere and be explicit about it.
Yeah.
And you'll get better at it.
I think that's it. Yeah?
Yep.
I think that's a wrap.